In the 1,990 seconds, a 19-year-old girl disappeared from a quiet Texas town without a trace. Her family searched for years, her name echoed through every street, and the mystery of her vanishing haunted Willow Creek like a shadow. But when a rusted car was unearthed deep in the woods, the truth that surfaced shook the entire community to its core. This is the story of Emily Carter, a case that began on an ordinary night and ended with a revelation no one saw coming. Emily Carter was a 19-year-old girl who lived in the small, quiet town of Willow Creek. Everyone in town knew her for her kind nature, bright smile, and willingness to help anyone in need. She was the kind of person who remembered people's birthdays, helped neighbors carry groceries, and always had time to listen. Emily worked part-time at a local diner while studying nursing at the community college. Her dream was to become a pediatric nurse and help children in hospitals. Her family often said that she had a heart made of gold. Emily lived with her parents, David and Linda Carter, and her younger brother, Sam. The Carter family wasn't rich, but their home was always full of warmth and laughter. Every evening, they had dinner together, sharing stories about their day. Emily's mom loved to say, "Our family may be small, but our love is big." For them, Emily wasn't just a daughter, she was the light of their home. On the evening of the 18th of May, 1996, Emily finished her shift at the diner around 9:30 p.m. It was a warm spring night. She chatted for a few minutes with her coworker, then called home to tell her mom she'd be stopping by her best friend Jessica's house for a little while before coming home. Jessica lived just a short drive away, and Emily made that trip many times before. She drove a small blue sedan, a car her parents had saved up for so she could travel safely to school and work. But that night, Emily never made it home. When midnight came and Emily still hadn't returned, Linda began to worry. It wasn't like Emily to stay out late without calling. She tried calling Jessica's house, but Jessica said Emily had never arrived. That sentence hit Linda like a wave of cold water. Panic started to rise. She called David, who immediately got in his truck and drove around Willow Creek, checking the usual roads and places Emily might have gone. There was no sign of her car anywhere. By 2 a.m., the Carters called the Willow Creek Police Department to report Emily missing. At first, the officers thought maybe she had stayed overnight with a friend or taken a detour. But Linda knew in her heart that something was terribly wrong. Emily was responsible, cautious, and always kept her parents updated. Her sudden silence didn't make sense. As the sun rose on May 19, fear turned into heartbreak. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers gathered to help search. They combed through nearby woods, riverbanks, and roadsides, calling her name, hoping she might answer. Her younger brother Sam handed out flyers with trembling hands. Linda could barely speak to reporters. Her eyes were red and swollen, her voice breaking as she repeated, "Please, just bring my daughter home." The police began their investigation, focusing on the route between the diner and Jessica's house. But there were no obvious signs, no broken glass, no tire marks, no witnesses who saw her car after she left work. It was as if Emily had vanished into thin air. Rumors began to spread around Willow Creek, and fear gripped the community. Parents kept their children closer. Doors were locked earlier than usual. Something dark had happened, and no one knew what. For the Carter family, every minute felt like an hour, and every hour like a lifetime. Linda sat by the phone waiting for it to ring. David barely slept, spending nights driving the same roads over and over, hoping for any clue. Emily's disappearance was more than just a missing person case. It tore the heart out of a family and shook the soul of a town that thought such tragedies only happened elsewhere. The morning after Emily's disappearance, Willow Creek changed. What had always been a peaceful town now felt heavy with fear and confusion. Police cars lined the streets near the diner, detectives spoke in low voices, and volunteers gathered outside the Carter home ready to help. No one could believe that a young woman like Emily had simply vanished overnight. The Willow Creek Police Department began their investigation immediately. Officers started by retracing Emily's steps from the night she disappeared. They visited the diner where she worked, spoke with her co-workers, and checked the phone records to confirm her last call to her mother. Everything matched what Linda had told them. Emily had called to say she'd stop by Jessica's house, and then she left. After that, there was nothing. No one remembered seeing her car after she drove away. There were no surveillance cameras on the road back then, and that made things even harder. Detectives focused on the short route between the diner and Jessica's house. It was only a few miles, a drive Emily had done hundreds of times before. Officers searched both sides of the road, nearby fields, and wooded areas. They used flashlights, dogs, and even borrowed boats to search the riverbanks. But there was still no sign of her car, her belongings, or Emily herself. It was like she had disappeared into thin air. The police also started talking to anyone who might have seen or heard something that night. They went door to door, asking neighbors if they noticed unusual cars, noises, or people. A few residents mentioned hearing a car speeding late at night, but no one could give a clear description. Others remembered nothing unusual. There were no strong leads. Meanwhile, the Carter family was living every parent's worst nightmare. Linda and David sat at their kitchen table while detectives asked them questions they never imagined answering. Did Emily have any enemies? Was she upset about anything recently? Had she ever run away before? Every question felt like a wound. Emily was happy, responsible, and deeply connected to her family. The idea that she would leave willingly didn't make sense to anyone who knew her. The media soon arrived in Willow Creek. News vans parked near the diner, and reporters gathered outside the police station. Emily's face appeared on every local TV channel and newspaper. Her smile, once a source of joy, now became a haunting reminder of the town's growing fear. Reporters described her as the kind girl next door, and people across the state started following the case. Strangers began sending tips to the police hotline, though most turned out to be false leads or confusion. Days turned into weeks. Police searched abandoned buildings, checked lakes, and followed every rumor, no matter how small. The FBI eventually got involved, offering resources and forensic teams. They examined Emily's phone records, bank account, and personal belongings for any clue. Her bank cards hadn't been used. Her phone had gone silent the night she vanished. Everything pointed to a sudden, unexpected event. The Carter family refused to give up. They organized community search parties every weekend. Dozens of people joined, walking through forests, fields, and old roads with flashlights and posters in hand. Sam, Emily's younger brother, kept handing out flyers at gas stations and stores, his eyes tired but determined. Linda often stood on their porch late at night, staring into the darkness, whispering prayers that her daughter would come home. But despite all the efforts, weeks passed with no solid lead. Investigators began to fear the worst, that Emily might have been taken by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. In a small town like Willow Creek, that thought terrified everyone. No one felt safe anymore. The investigation was only just beginning, but it was already clear. This case was not going to be easy. The answers weren't waiting around the corner. Emily's disappearance had become a puzzle with too many missing pieces, and the clock was ticking. As weeks slowly turned into months, the atmosphere in Willow Creek grew heavier. What started as a desperate search filled with energy and hope now felt like a long, painful waiting game. The posters of Emily's smiling face that once covered store windows and telephone poles began to fade from the sunlight. People still remembered her, but the town slowly returned to its daily routine, even though a cloud of sadness still hung over everyone. For the Carter family, however, time didn't heal anything, it only made the silence louder. Linda continued to call the police station every few days, asking for updates, hoping for any small breakthrough. But most of the time, the answer was the same: we're still working on it. David spent many nights alone in his truck, driving the roads Emily used to take, hoping he might spot something the investigators had missed. Sam grew quieter, carrying the pain like a weight on his small shoulders. Meanwhile, the police investigation faced challenges. The lack of strong evidence made it difficult to move forward. There was no crime scene, no car, no witnesses who had seen Emily after she left work. It felt like chasing shadows. But detectives started to look closer at people connected to Emily. They made a list of individuals who might have had any motive, no matter how small. Some early suspicions fell on a young man who had worked at the diner with Emily. He had shown interest in her in the past, but Emily had always been polite and kept her distance. Police questioned him several times, checked his alibi, and searched his car. In the end, nothing linked him to Emily's disappearance. He was eventually cleared, but rumors in town lingered for months, damaging his reputation. They also questioned a delivery driver who was seen near the diner that night. Some believed he might have seen something. He told police he made his last stop around the same time Emily left work, but he didn't notice anything strange. His story checked out too. Over time, detectives received hundreds of tips, some from locals, others from people in nearby towns. Unfortunately, most of them led nowhere. A few were cruel hoaxes, while others were simply mistaken sightings. Investigators followed every lead, but the trail always went cold. By the end of the first year, the active search began to slow down. Police resources were stretched thin, and with no new evidence, the case began to lose priority. It wasn't forgotten, but it became what investigators quietly called a cold case. A case without movement, stuck in time. For the Carter family, hearing those words felt like a knife to the heart. Still, they refused to give up. Linda became an advocate for missing persons, attending community meetings and pushing the police to keep Emily's case alive. She wrote letters to newspapers, appeared on local TV, and reminded everyone that Emily was not just a name on a file, she was a daughter, a sister, and a friend. Her determination inspired many in Willow Creek, and some residents continued to hold candlelight vigils every year on May 18, the night Emily vanished. Inside the police department, Emily's case file grew thicker. Every new tip, interview, or rumor was added to the growing stack. Detectives would occasionally revisit the evidence, hoping that a fresh pair of eyes might spot something they had missed. But for years, nothing changed. What once was a loud and frantic search had now become a quiet, painful waiting. Life moved forward, but for the Carter family, time had stopped the night Emily disappeared. The unanswered questions haunted them daily. Where is she? What happened? Who knows the truth? The town had almost accepted that Emily's case might never be solved. But deep down, Linda never stopped believing that one day, the truth would come out. She didn't know when or how, but she held on to that hope like a lifeline. They had no idea that a single discovery, years later, would finally break the silence and bring the case back to life. Years passed, but the memory of Emily Carter never faded. Her family continued to live in Willow Creek, holding on to hope even when the world seemed to have moved on. Her mother, Linda, kept Emily's room exactly the way it was on the night she disappeared. The soft pink curtains, the framed family photos, and the textbooks on her desk stayed untouched. It was her way of keeping Emily close, as if one day she would walk through the door and everything would go back to how it used to be. Then, 6 years after Emily vanished, something happened that no one expected. It started with a construction project on the outskirts of Willow Creek. A group of workers were clearing land near a wooded area to build a new housing development. The land had been untouched for decades, covered in tall grass and thick trees. While digging near an old service road, one of the workers noticed something unusual sticking out of the soil, a piece of rusted metal. At first, they thought it was part of old farm equipment, but as the digging continued, it became clear they had uncovered the roof of a car. The police were called immediately. Investigators arrived at the site and carefully cleared the area. The car was buried deep, almost entirely hidden by earth and tree roots. When they finally pulled it out, their hearts stopped. It was a blue sedan, the same make and model as Emily Carter's car. The license plate confirmed it. After 6 long years, they had found her vehicle. The car was badly rusted and damaged, but what was inside told a heartbreaking story. Investigators discovered human remains in the driver's seat. Alongside them were a few personal belongings, a small bracelet, a set of car keys, and a faded student ID card with Emily's smiling face. There was no doubt anymore. Emily Carter had finally been found. The news spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. After years of questions, the town was hit with a mix of shock, sadness, and relief. For the Carter family, it was a moment they had both prayed for and dreaded. Linda collapsed in tears when detectives arrived at her door. David held her tightly, his own eyes filled with grief. Sam, now older, sat silently, trying to process the reality that his sister's mystery had finally surfaced. The discovery reignited the investigation. Detectives reopened the case file, this time with a major piece of evidence they never had before. Forensic experts carefully examined the car. They looked at the damage, the position of the vehicle, and the remains. The car had been deliberately driven off a secluded service road and buried under soil, something that clearly wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. Back in the 1,990 seconds, Technology was limited, but now, forensic science had advanced. Investigators collected DNA, fingerprints, and other evidence from the car. Even after years underground, some samples were still usable. They sent everything to the state crime lab, hoping for a match. Within weeks, they got a hit. The DNA found inside the car didn't just belong to Emily. There was also DNA from another person. It matched a man who had recently been arrested in a nearby county for an unrelated assault case. His name had never been on the original suspect list, but his past showed a troubling pattern. He had lived in Willow Creek during the 1,990 seconds and had even worked at a gas station not far from Emily's usual route home. For the first time in years, detectives had a real suspect. Interviews were planned, evidence was re-examined, and old witnesses were contacted again. What had once been a cold, forgotten file was now the center of a storm. The truth that had been buried with the car was finally beginning to come out. The discovery of the vehicle didn't just bring back the investigation, it brought back hope. For Linda, David, and Sam, it meant that Emily's voice, though silent for years, was finally being heard again. When Emily's car was pulled from the ground, it didn't just reopen the case, it gave investigators something they never had before: physical evidence. And this time, unlike in the 1,990 seconds, they had the power of modern forensic technology on their side. Science had advanced dramatically, and techniques that didn't exist when Emily disappeared were now able to uncover secrets buried for years. The first step was to carefully transport the car to a secure forensic facility. Technicians treated it like a delicate time capsule. Every inch of the vehicle was photographed, documented, and examined. Even though the car had been underground for years, some materials had surprisingly remained intact. Small details that once might have been ignored now held the potential to solve the mystery. Forensic anthropologists studied the skeletal remains found in the driver's seat. Using dental records and bone structure, they confirmed what the family already knew in their hearts: the remains were Emily's. For Linda and David, hearing the official confirmation was devastating. But it also gave them a form of closure they had been denied for so long. Their daughter was no longer just missing. She had finally been brought home. Next came DNA testing. Swabs taken from different parts of the car, the steering wheel, door handles, and seat fabric were sent to the state crime lab. Years ago, such old and degraded samples would have been impossible to analyze. But now, with advanced techniques, forensic experts were able to extract usable DNA. The results revealed two clear profiles. One belonged to Emily, and the other belonged to a man named Robert Hayes. Robert Hayes was a name that hadn't appeared in the original investigation. Back in the 1,990 seconds, he had been a quiet, somewhat withdrawn man who worked at a nearby gas station. He had no major criminal record at the time, so he never drew attention. But years later, he had been arrested for an assault in another county, and his DNA had been entered into the national database. That was the key. The match to his DNA from the car evidence lit up the system, giving detectives the lead they had been waiting for. Investigators dug into Robert Hayes' past. They discovered that during the time Emily disappeared, he lived just a few miles from the route she took every night. He often worked late shifts at the gas station right along her path. Some locals even remembered him occasionally visiting the diner where Emily worked, though no one had thought much of it at the time. Looking back, those small details suddenly carried a chilling weight. Forensic experts also used modern accident reconstruction tools to study the way the car was found. They determined that the car had not accidentally veered off the road. Instead, it had been deliberately driven off the old service road, pushed into a hidden ditch, and covered with soil. The damage to the car matched a controlled, planned action, not a crash. This pointed strongly to foul play. Meanwhile, forensic teams uncovered trace fibers and fingerprints that had been preserved in unexpected places, like the lining of the door and the trunk area. These too linked back to Robert Hayes. Piece by piece, science began to reconstruct the night of Emily's disappearance. It was like putting together a puzzle that had been locked away for years, and now every missing piece was sliding into place. When detectives presented the findings to the Carter family, there were tears, but also determination. For Linda, the forensic breakthroughs were more than just evidence. They were Emily's silent voice finally being heard. Every swab, every test, every match spoke the truth she had waited to hear for so long. Robert Hayes was brought in for questioning. He initially denied everything, but the DNA evidence was too strong to ignore. Detectives now had a clear direction, and after years of darkness, the case was finally moving toward the truth. The DNA evidence had finally cracked open what years of searching could not. When investigators confronted Robert Hayes with the results, his confident denial began to crumble. At first, he insisted he had never met Emily, but detectives laid out the evidence piece by piece: the DNA on the car door, the fibers that matched his clothing, the location of his home near her route. Eventually, under pressure, Robert's calm mask broke. After hours of questioning, he finally confessed to being involved in Emily's disappearance. Robert admitted that on the night of the 18th of May 1990, he had followed Emily's car after she left work. He had seen her at the diner before and developed a disturbing obsession. When Emily slowed down near the service road, he blocked her path and forced her off the road. He then attacked her and left her car buried in the secluded wooded area, believing that no one would ever find it. For years, he lived with the secret, blending into everyday life as if nothing had happened. With his confession and the overwhelming forensic evidence, Robert Hayes was arrested and charged with kidnapping, murder, and concealment of a body. The trial that followed gripped Willow Creek. People who had lived through Emily's disappearance sat in the courtroom, holding hands and listening quietly as the story they had feared for years unfolded in detail. Emily's family attended every hearing, determined to see justice through to the end. The prosecutors built a strong case using the modern forensic evidence, Robert's own confession, and witness testimonies from people who had seen him near the diner during that time. Forensic experts explained to the jury how science had uncovered the truth, even after so many years. Linda, David, and Sam each gave emotional testimonies about Emily's life, who she was, what she dreamed of, and the unbearable pain of living without her. The jury took less than 2 days to reach a verdict. Robert Hayes was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Carter family, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had finally been served, but nothing could bring Emily back. Linda wept as the verdict was read. David held her hand tightly. Sam, now a young man, stared ahead with quiet strength, knowing that his sister's story had finally reached its end. But Emily's story didn't end in the courtroom. It lived on in the hearts of the people she had touched. The town of Willow Creek came together to honor her memory. A memorial garden was built near the diner where she once worked, filled with flowers and a small plaque that read, "In loving memory of Emily Carter, a light that will never fade." Linda became a strong advocate for missing persons in the years that followed. She worked with local organizations to support families going through similar pain. She often spoke at community events, reminding people never to lose hope and to trust that the truth can surface, even after decades. Her courage inspired many. Emily's case also changed the way the local police handled missing person investigations. They improved their evidence storage methods, increased collaboration with state forensic labs, and created community awareness programs to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Emily's legacy became a force for change, making the community stronger and more alert. For the Carter family, life would never be the same, but they found peace in knowing that Emily's voice was heard, justice was done, and her story had the power to protect others. Each year, on May 18, people in Willow Creek gathered at the memorial garden to light candles, share memories, and promise never to forget her. Emily's story began with heartbreak, but it ended with truth, justice, and lasting legacy. And in Willow Creek, her name will forever be remembered not as just a missing person, but as a symbol of hope and resilience. Emily Carter's story reminds us that even when years pass and hope seems distant, the truth has a way of rising to the surface. Her case shows the power of persistence, the importance of modern forensics, and the strength of a community that refuses to forget. Justice was delayed, but it was not denied. If you found this story impactful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more real cases that deserve to be remembered. Your support helps bring these stories to light and keeps the memory of the victims alive. Stay tuned for more true stories that reveal how justice is found, even in the darkest moments.